I want to thank Albert Lee Seeds for inviting me down here. It's a pleasure to be here, back close to home. And I got to see if I got the right one. There we go. Although home is a little bit colder always than here. Now I know if I compared this to International Falls, it wouldn't be. But last year, number of total days below freezing: Minneapolis 135, Bismarck, where I'm from, 223. So we tend to get a bit cold where I'm at. And what I'm going to do today is explain to you a little bit of our operation, how we got started, and our journey in the past 20 years of improving soil health. That operation that I'm on, we're on 5,000 acres right next to, well, we're actually in city jurisdiction now into the city of Bismarck. But that operation was started by my in-laws back in 1956, and they farmed conventionally from 1956 until my wife and I bought it in 1991. Their cropping system was half tillage. It was all tillage, half summer fallow, half crop. All small grains: spring wheat, oats, barley. That's the only crops they pretty much grew there. And they had a continual use of synthetic fertilizers, and not only fertilizer, but pesticides, fungicides, etc. I was very fortunate when we purchased that operation that I did some soil testing, and NRCS did some baseline work. And what we found is that organic matter levels at that time were from 1.7 to 1.9%, which, when you compare it historically to what those soils were like pre-settlement, the prairie soils are at 7 to 8% organic matter. So in other words, we had burned off or lost or utilized over 75% of the carbon in those soils through tillage over the years. And I also, NRCS did some infiltration rate tests, and we could only infiltrate 1/2 of an inch of rainfall per hour. Now, our normal, if there is such a thing, precipitation in that area is about 15 inches, of which 10 inches is rainfall, and the other 5 inches comes from the 70 plus inches of snow we usually get. So we're in a bit challenged environment moisture-wise. As far as the grazing system, when I took it over, we could run about 65 cow-calf pairs, 35 yearlings. There was 3 pastures, season-long grazing. The cow-calf pairs were run out on stubble fields after harvest, and then they were locked up in the corral, fed 6 to 7 months, and we typically calved in March and April. I'll never forget, and I'll tell you this right up front. I was born and raised in town, so this is all new to me. But happened to marry the right lady, and my in-laws had 3 daughters, so I was the chosen one to come back to the place. And so a lot of what I learned from my father-in-law. And I'll never forget, spring of the year, we were out there working the fields, and he said, "You'll learn the more you work the soil, the better it is." And to me, this just didn't quite make sense, because come August, we were always praying for a rain. We were always drying it out, and I could never figure that out. Well, after we bought it then, after a couple years, I had a good friend in the northern part of the state who was a no-tiller. And he convinced me that it was worth my time and effort to go no-till. And he said, "But Gabe, I'll give you some advice. Before you go no-till, sell all your tillage equipment. Then you're never tempted to go back." And I actually did that. I followed his advice. We sold all the plows, all the tillage equipment. So I've been 100% zero-till since 1993. And it turned out to be pretty good advice. First year, we pretty much followed the same crop rotation, mostly small grains, except I was cropping everything because I had a farm to pay for. We had really good yields, and I thought, boy, this is pretty easy. 1994 came along, we added peas to the rotation. We started to try and diversify. I was trying to grow some legumes because I hated writing those checks for inputs, and that worked out okay. Then 1995 came along, and the day before we were going to start combining, we lost 1,200 acres to hail. All of our spring wheat crop, we lost to hail. We had no crop insurance because my father-in-law had had hail twice in 35 years, and it didn't amount to a lot. So it just didn't hail in our area, so I didn't think crop insurance was a good buy. Well, that was pretty tough to take. So after that hailstorm, I decided, well, boy, I got to grow some feed for the livestock. What can I do? Well, a lot of this you'll see mirrors what Dr. Nichols talked about, the plant interaction. So I decided, well, what can I seed without having to write a lot of checks for inputs? So we seeded winter triticale and hairy vetch, grass and a legume. I was trying to produce feed. That's all I was doing. I wasn't thinking about cover crops at that time. But this was my first foray, so to speak, into cover cropping back in '95. 1996 came along and I added corn to the rotation. We were planting peas. I was trying to add more crops. And I was pretty fortunate. We had some livestock. We were able to pay the interest back, but no principal. Then hailstorm come again and we lost 100% of our crop to hail again. Well, then things are getting pretty tough for us. So I had to grow feed, so I started on combinations such as this. Proso millet, cowpeas, and buckwheat. And that's mixed up there. It's not proso buckwheat, but it's proso millet, cowpeas, and buckwheat. And all of these species, it so happens I was going through Albert Lee's seed catalog this morning, and pretty much every species that I'm going to talk about today, they have available, which is a really good thing. So take advantage of that. Well, after 2 years, I found this, and I really thought it was pretty fitting. A banker is a fellow who lends you his umbrella when the sun is shining, but wants it back when it begins to rain. And that's kind of how I felt after 2 years of crop failure. Banker wasn't quite as friendly then as he used to be. 1997 came along then, and 1997 was extremely dry. Nobody in our area combined an acre. You know, I was fortunate we were able to get enough feed together for the livestock, but that isn't going to pay all the bills either. 1998 came along and I started adding more diversity. You know, the banker wasn't going to loan me any more money for inputs, so that was out of the question. My wife and I both took off farm jobs, and I had to figure out how am I going to get this soil healthy in order to produce. So we started to take advantage of those things Dr. Nichols talked about, those relationships going on in the soil. And at that time, I'll be honest with you, I had no idea what the word soil health meant. I was just trying to stay alive and keep the banker at bay. And we started grazing a lot of these cover crops with livestock, trying to integrate the livestock and cropping system. And it turned out really beneficial. You know, it was to the point back there, I couldn't even afford to buy twine or anything. So we had to force the livestock into grazing as long as possible because I just couldn't afford those inputs. Well, 1998, though, didn't turn out any better. That's a thunderstorm coming, and we lost 80% of our crop to hail. So I lost pretty much 4 crops in a row to hail and drought, and my wife and I will tell you today that was absolutely the best thing that could have happened to us. I wouldn't be standing here today if that wouldn't have happened to us, because it forced me to change. You know, things were really looking tough. The piggy bank was pretty bare by that time, you know. I often make the comment, we were so poor the banker knew if we bought toilet paper. But, you know, all of my neighbors, they were just waiting for me to fail because they wanted to buy the operation. But I was pretty stubborn and there's no way I was going to give up. And during that time, I went to a holistic management conference, and there was a gentleman there by the name of Don Campbell from up in Saskatchewan, and Don made this statement. He said, if you want to make small changes, change how you do things. But when you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. And I thought about that after the conference because I visited with Don and I told him my story about 4 years of crop failures, and he said, you have to look at it at a different angle, from a different angle and a different perspective. And I came to the conclusion that the greatest roadblock in solving a problem is the human mind. And that's what Dr. Nichols talked about. Think of it in that context. She talked about how, you know, nature does this naturally, transfers nutrients, you know, highly efficient at nitrogen and phosphorus uptake into plants. Why aren't we taking advantage of that? Instead, we're trying to impose our will on nature. And I really see that in production agriculture today. Look at production agriculture today. All we do as producers is treat symptoms. If we got poor fertility, we try and force fertilizer onto the soil, even though we know, it's proven, Dr. Nichols showed that, only from 10 to 40% of the fertilizer is taken up by the plant, yet we keep trying to force our will on it. You know, and I don't care what you're talking about, compaction, weeds, low yields, you know, high input costs, whatever it is, those are just symptoms. And all we do is spend all of our time treating symptoms. Well, what's the real problem? We got to focus on solving problems instead of treating symptoms. My friend Ray Archuleta with NRCS took this photo, and I really thought it appropriate. He said, "This soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever." And when you think of what Dr. Nichols just showed us, isn't that what's happening with our soils today? There's no armor on that soil. We're not feeding soil life. All the water is running off it. It's not infiltrating. And the temperature is extremely high. I really came to the conclusion back after those 4 years of crop failures that I was disconnected from the land. I really didn't know how to farm the soil and how to supply the soil with what it needed. So how do we improve soil health? The answer I found is to imitate a native rangeland ecosystem, and that's what Dr. Nichols just explained to us. We have to look at how these soils function prior to us imposing our will on them. Look at what nature does. In nature, there's no mechanical disturbance. There's some disturbance, but no mechanical disturbance. There's always armor on the soil surface unless you have a major catastrophe. Nature cycles water very efficiently. You know, it seems like every year we're having more and more problems with water, but if you stop and think about it, that's not nature's fault. It's because of what we've done to the soil ecosystem is the reason we're having problems with water. There's living plant root networks, like she talked about. The nutrients cycle all the time via biology. You don't have that overload of nutrients, which causes the flush of weeds. Nature cycles it in a timely manner. And there's thousands upon thousands of years of research and development. You know, they call what we're doing here, this regenerative ag, as something new. I tell people it's nothing new. There's thousands of years of doing what I'm doing. Conventional agriculture today is what's new. Roots store carbon, build organic matter, and cycle nutrients. Plain and simple. Then why don't we have living roots in the soil all the time? So I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to list 5 key components that I think, and Dr. Nichols, it's just funny, you'd swear we collaborated on our presentations. I actually didn't realize till this morning that she was speaking here, but you'll see many of the same things repeated. And then I'm going to show you how we address those on our operation. The first is least amount of mechanical disturbance possible. I realize I'm talking to mostly organic producers. That I realize you're going to do some tillage. Okay, let's just keep it minimal. And Gary talked about that this morning. Let's keep it minimal, and that's not till deep. This is a photo that was taken. A gentleman had a forested area, and he cleared that forested area, half of it, and farmed it. This is the same soil after 17 years of tillage. Went from 4.3% organic matter down to 1.6%. I wish I would have archived my soils when I bought that place in 1991, because my soils looked a lot like that on the right-hand side of this photo. Where's the aggregates that Dr. Nichols talked about? How am I going to infiltrate water? Where's the life in that soil? There isn't any. And that's what I started out with. So that's why I decided to go no-till, is for that reason. And I want the least amount of disturbance possible. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I've learned that this is one of the most underappreciated things we in production agriculture have, and that's the mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi secreting glomalin, building those soil aggregates, and then transferring nutrients. This is all free to us if we take advantage of it. It just blows my mind why in production agriculture we as producers want to write checks. One of the mottos my family and I have on our operation is we want to sign the back of the check and not the front. That's a pretty good motto to have. Dr. Nichols talked about this, increasing the area that those plants can bring nutrients from and water from, and I'll show you the importance of that coming up. And also fighting off all those pathogens, nematodes, etc. If those cell walls have formed that symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi, there's no way that nematodes can get into those roots. We haven't had to spray a fungicide on our operation since before the turn of the century. We just don't have problems with these things anymore because we have a healthy, functioning soil ecosystem. She had shown you that one. There's a picture, a close-up of our soil. That's really close up. That's just in where that single disc of that 1590 drill opens up. But look at that aggregation on that soil. And that's what we've built over time, is we've built that soil structure. Soil should look like black cottage cheese. There's no doubt about it. You need those soil aggregates. Mycorrhizal fungi do a lot of things, like Dr. Nichols talked about. They can build soil carbon, improve water efficiency, increase the efficiency of that nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And the way we do that is we have to reduce or eliminate chemical fertilizer use, which you guys have done a good job of. We have to eliminate or reduce tillage, and we have to keep a living root in the ground as long as possible throughout the year. What's the second thing you see in a native rangeland ecosystem? You see armor on the soil. You don't see bare soil. You know, when I first got to that place, I mentioned we were tilling all the time, half summer fallow, half crop. There was a lot of bare soil. You just don't see that in nature, yet we try and do that. Bare soil is detrimental to soil health. Dr. Nichols had photos like this. This one was from eastern Colorado just earlier this year. You know, we shouldn't see that anymore. It shouldn't be happening, yet here it is. Last year, my son, for Father's Day, he had said, "Dad, there's a soil health tour I'd like to take you on Father's Day." This is what we saw on that tour. To me, that's not soil health. You know, we shouldn't be seeing that. That's a photo of our cropland after seeding in the spring. That's what I want to see. That's armor on the soil surface. That's protection. Here I have a cover crop emerging right through that armor. How are weeds going to germinate through there? I'm not going to stand here and tell you I don't have weeds. I have some, but I have a lot less now when I keep that residue on the surface than I did with bare soil. Why do weeds germinate and on bare soil ground? It's because they're trying to fill their function in nature, which is to put armor on the soil surface. You know, nature's going to try and heal its wounds any chance it can. The other thing that residue will really do for us is buffer that heat. And, you know, we can get fairly warm in late July and August, and that residue really keeps that soil temperatures down. And Dr. Nichols had this photo in there. It was actually taken back at my place one day, and where we had a cover crop and then bare soil. And that soil temperature, over 20 degrees difference, makes a huge difference, as she explained to you, in the amount of evaporation, in the amount of growth on that plant, and in the soil biology. Soil biology does not want to function in that hot of conditions. The other thing, it's extremely conducive to soil life. This photo was taken on that day there, and look at the earthworms we have functioning right up near the soil surface, because we have that armor on the soil protecting that soil, keeping those soil temperatures down. And if you have that many earthworms, that's what it looks like under the cover crop. I don't know if you can see that from the back, but that's solid earthworm castings. When I bought that farm in '91, you would never find an earthworm. I could never go fishing. There was no earthworms on that cropland. Last spring we did earthworm counts, 12 inches by 12 inches by 2 inches deep. We were averaging over 60. That's a lot of earthworms. Now that was in the spring of the year when their populations are at their peak. But the fact of the matter is, if you build the home, they will come. But you've got to provide the home for soil biology in order to take advantage of these things. Oh, it just so happens I got this photo in there. In 2003, I had the good fortune, Dr. Nichols was hired at the ARS lab there at Mandan, and she came out to my place and she made this statement, which I'll never forget. She said, "Your soils will never become sustainable as long as synthetic fertilizers are used." And what she meant by that was that I had to get the soil biology to provide the nutrients and function on its own. Otherwise, I was just defeating my purpose. So from years 2003 through 2008, I did split trials on my cropland. We were using half a field we'd put synthetic fertilizer on, the other half none. All 4 years, the non-fertilized was equal to or greater than the fertilized. So I haven't used any synthetic fertilizer since 2008. So I owe her a big thanks for that. Third thing that you see in a healthy native rangeland ecosystem is diversity. This photo here was taken on one of our native rangeland pastures, and I tell people I bought that pasture for 2 reasons. Number one was the diversity. My son teaches range management at the local college there in Bismarck, and he brought his students out to this pasture one day, and in 2 hours they counted over 140 different species of grasses, forbs, and legumes. That's diversity. If we have that type of diversity in our native rangeland, why don't we have it in production agriculture today? Now, I'm not saying you have to have 140 different species of crops, but we certainly have to have more than corn on corn. 2006, I was down at No-Till on the Plains conference, and I had the good fortune of hearing this man. This is Dr. Ademir Caligari from Brazil. Dr. Caligari is the world's leading authority on cover crops. He's worked in over 65 different countries all over the world. He works for the United Nations. And he said 2 things that really stuck out in my mind. He said, "You give me 2 inches of rainfall a year, 200 inches, or anywhere in between, and I can grow you a cover crop." Well, I knew then that I could do it in North Dakota. The other thing he told us was that cover crops should be used in multi-species combinations. Well, up to that time, I was only using 2 or 3-way mixes, and people thought I was crazy. Well, at that time, I was on the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District Board, and we had some plot land just a mile south of my place. And the winter of 05-06 was really dry, but we decided, well, we're going to test his theory, what he told us. We're going to go and we're going to seed cover crops as monocultures in strips, and then we're going to mix the seed together and seed them as polycultures. So we went in there, and this is a photo of that plot land back in 2006. We seeded these the end of May into dry soil. Here's what it looked like on July 31st. We'd had less than an inch of rain on it. That's the monoculture of turnips, all dried up. Right next to it was the oilseed radish, all dried up. And you keep going down the line till we got to the multi-species mix, and that's what it looked like. Now, we've been told for years as producers, oh, you got to keep everything weed-free and you got to have a monoculture. Well, boy, that blew that right out of the water. Every person who saw this had to be impressed, and it just changed my thinking dramatically from that point on. Here's the NRCS, they clipped the production and weighted. We tripled dry matter production where we had the mixes. Now at the bottom, the difference between full rate and half rate, we simply got too many plants per square foot there at the full rate. But the fact of the matter is, the more species we had in the mix, the healthier that ecosystem was. And Dr. Nichols was quoted as saying this: "Not only do the fungi provide for the needs of one plant, but the fungal hyphae pipeline connect to multiple plants. This helps satisfy the nutritional and energy needs of both microorganisms and the plants." So it was just like she talked about in the presentation. You have all these different root types, rooting depths. They're connected together, feeding each other. This is natural way that nature functions. Yet here we are as producers trying to fight against it. Doesn't make sense. So when I travel, and I spend a great part of my time traveling across all North America, what do I see? You know, I see a heck of a lot of corn and soybean fields. And what's the result of that? You know, I've been on thousands upon thousands of operations all over North America, Australia. I haven't been on any operation, including my own, that isn't degraded. We've degraded our resources, and we've come to accept that. We need to regenerate our soils and start working to rebuild them. Otherwise, what's going to be here for the next generation? Monocultures are a detriment to soil health. There's no two ways about it. We have to start realizing that. So what we've done on our operation, I'm not here today to try and tell you what you should do on yours. Only you can decide that. But on our operation, we've gone to, remember when I started, it was all cool season grasses, spring wheat, oats, barley. Now we have all 4 crop types. We have warm and cool season broadleaves and grasses, and then we rarely ever seed monocultures. For instance, in the upper left, that's oats with 3 types of clover growing in it. In the upper right, that's a diverse cool season broadleaf mix. The lower left, that's corn along with hairy vetch. And in the lower right, that's sunflower with over 20 different species of covers growing in it. I'm not going to seed monocultures anymore. Now, I will warn you, this will get you kicked out of crop insurance, but I no longer take part in crop insurance. That's antagonistic towards soil health, and I don't want to be on welfare, so I don't take crop insurance. Here's a close-up picture of the oats. Oats has been extremely profitable for us. It's easy to grow, it yields real well, and we can make really good money with oats. So here's oats, no-tilled in with 3 types of clover growing under it. We'll straight combine the oats off, that clover will take off and grow. We can graze livestock on it, or we can just leave it as a cover. We're using all annual clovers in here, so they winter kill. We use winter to our advantage. Yes, question? The question is, what am I planting the oats after? Usually after corn. I like to follow corn with either peas or oats, some crop like that. And we can go right in there. Those no-till drills, there's no amount of residue that I've found that I can't plant into. Do I have to replenish the nitrogen that the corn burns up? I will show you, coming up, if you'll just hold on, I'll show you some slides that show you the kind of crop I can grow on the nitrogen available in my soils. The 4th thing, living root in the ground as long as possible. You look at a native prairie ecosystem, and there used to be a lot of a native prairie in Minnesota, so I know it works here too. Both cool and warm season broadleaves and grasses were in that native prairie. And those plants live much longer than we think throughout the year. You know, I used to think that our last killing frost in the spring is usually around mid-May. First one in the fall is in early September. And as long as it doesn't bite me, I don't care. But, you know, my wife has 43 cats walking around the farmyard, so I'm used to it. Anyway, I used to think that was the window of time we could grow things. Now what I found is that as my soil has gotten healthier, and this gets back to the last question that Dr. Nichols answered, we're able to extend that growing season. I can easily have plants growing in March, and we can easily keep them growing until the snow gets pretty deep. Usually, I can keep plants growing up until Thanksgiving in our environment now. Now, not everything. The warm seasons are going to die at a frost, but I'll show you pictures here of us having flowering species in October. So we've extended the growing season. And we're doing that because the soil is much healthier and the respiration warms up that soil. So how do we keep things growing? We use cover crops. And a cover crop to me is really a diverse mix that enhances the life and the function in the soil. And that's what we're trying to do with these cover crops, is we're trying to focus on soil health. So the question is, what cover crops do we use and how do we use them? The thing about cover crops is you're going to use them to address your resource concern. And take advantage of the professionals here at Albert Lee Seed. When you call them, they're going to ask you, what's your resource concern? Because my resource concern may not be the same as my neighbor's. You know, and we're to the point on our operation, we design cover crop mixes for each specific field. We have over 2,000 acres of cropland. Our goal is to get a cover crop on all 2,000 acres every year. Maybe before a cash crop, along with the cash crop, or after the cash crop. But we want a living root in that soil as long as possible. So we're going to put cover crops in all the time. Which ones depend on the resource concern? What are you trying to do? Do you want to build organic matter? Do you want to improve infiltration? Do you want to increase nutrient cycling? Do you need more armor on the surface? Do you want to feed wildlife? Do you need to feed livestock? Do you want to enhance pollinators? What is it you're trying to do? So often I get a lot of phone calls. During the summer I'll average 25 phone calls a day, and I'll spend 2 hours a day answering emails every day. And so often the people call me because they had problems with their cover crop. Well, only to find out that they put the wrong cover crop on that field to address their resource concern. They didn't do their homework first. You got to put a lot of thought into these cover crops. But what is it you're trying to do? And why do we want diverse mixes in the cover crops? If soil health is truly your goal, then crop diversity cannot be ignored or overstated. Remember that photo I showed you, 140 different species. If you really want to improve soil health, you have to get crop diversity. I spend a lot of time speaking throughout the Corn Belt, and they say, but Gabe, I grow corn and beans. And I said, yes, but if you really want to focus on soil health, you're going to have to expand your thought process. You know, I speak to tens of thousands of people every year, and I hear it every time. Gabe, but that won't work here. And I tell them, you're right, it won't. Because if you have that attitude, it isn't going to work. But I'll tell you this, I've worked with thousands of producers all over the world, and I tell them, you commit for 5 years. If you commit a field for 5 years, I have never had anybody do it for 5 years, then go back to the conventional way. I've had some drop out after a year or two, but nobody after 5 years has quit and gone back. They're just not gonna, because the improvements in soil health will put more dollars in their pocket, and it'll also improve things for the next generations. Plants were evolved over time to be used in multi-species ecosystems. That's just simple nature. Resiliency of soils comes about from diversity. How can I get by now without paying for crop insurance? Easy, my soils are resilient. Now, I'm not going to stand in front of you and tell you if we had a 5-year drought, it wouldn't affect me. It would. But 1 or 2 years, I don't even give it a second thought. It isn't going to slow my operation down one lick. You know, we've built so much resiliency into our soils that I don't have to worry about that anymore. It also is a balanced diet for soil biology, and Dr. Nichols talked about this, how many different species of biology there are in that soil, yet we don't take the time to feed them. And then you really need balance, because even good things, such as the legumes and brassicas, when not used in moderation, can become a problem. So there's 4 main questions you got to ask when you're considering cover crops. What are your goals and concerns? What's your environmentals? What is the time frame? When do you want to seed that cover crop, in other words? And then what's your budget? The more specific your goals and concerns are, the less diversity you'll have in that cover crop mix. And then the tighter your planting window is, the less diversity you're going to have in that mix. So environmentals are things like, what's your rainfall? You know, we're not going to recommend planting sun hemp in eastern Montana where there's only 8 inches of rain a year. Not going to work too good. You know, what's your evaporation rate? How long a growing season do you have? You know, you have to make sure those cover crop species can fit into whatever window you have. What's your soil type? And what's the condition of your soils? You know, do you have a compaction problem? Are you sandy? Are you heavy clay? What are you? That'll make a difference. What's your seeding method? Do you have a no-till drill? Or are you going to broadcast? Or are you going to aerial apply it? Those things have to be taken into consideration. What was the previous crop and what's your next crop? Because that's going to determine. A lot of times I see people have issues where they'll put in the cover crop mix too close a related species to what they're going to seed next year. Then you may have some issues with disease or a pest. And then herbicides are a big thing. Now I realize most of you in are organic, but there's a lot of herbicide carryover problems, and you got to be aware of that. All the more reason not to use herbicides. Then what's your time frame? Where are you going in? Are you going in spring, summer, late summer, fall? When are you going to seed this? You know, try and not seed too many species out of their natural growing time frame, and I'll talk about that a little more. So where do you have a production gap that you can fit a cover crop in? You know, you have to decide that. And so often, when I talk to people in the corn and bean belt, you know, they got to add winter wheat to the rotation or something like that in order to have a time frame where they can get more of these cover crops established. And some of that is we have to do the homework ourselves. We got to develop markets for other crops. You know, so often I was in Missouri last year and they said, but Gabe, where do we market something other than corn or beans? And I said, well, does your semi have tires? You know, come on. You got to develop the market yourself for some of these. You can't expect it to come knocking on the door. We've done a lot of work in our area developing markets for some of these crops. If you have livestock, where's a gap in your forage production? This is a little chart my son put together. It lists when those specific forages are their highest nutrient content, and then we're going to grow cover crops to fill in the nutritional gap that in those. So we're able to supply our livestock with the nutrients that are needed throughout the growing season. Talk a little bit more of that a little later on. So this is just some of the cover crop species we planted in 2014. Don't pay attention to the species. They may or may not work on your operation. Just notice I have some of all 4 crop types. And we actually seeded over 70 different species on our operation this past year, mainly because I just like to monkey around with cover crops. But the fact of the matter is, look at all the diversity. Now, we're not putting those all in the same field, you know, and all mixed together. Usually we're seeding anywhere from 12 to 20 different species in a mix. It's pretty common for us. I don't recommend guys starting out to seed that many, you know, but you can build up to it. So here's some of the options for cover crops. This is a cool season mix. This is an oat, pea, vetch combination along with some other things, and every species on here, I noticed that Albert Lee has all these available. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think you've got every one of these available here. So that's just an example of a cool season mix that you can use. You know, we have 2,000 acres of cropland. We're going to plant cash crops on about 1,800 of those acres every year. The other 200, we're going to go with full season cover crops on. But there's a lot of our acres where we'll have a fall seeded biennial on ahead of time. This is Phacelia, and I know that's available here. We've been using Phacelia for a number of years. Livestock do not eat it, but it's a great pollinator attractant. And we try and have flowering species in every one of our mixes to attract the pollinators and the predator insects. There's a reason I haven't had to spray a pesticide since before the turn of the century, is because we have a home for the predator insects. Phacelia also puts on a tremendous amount of root mass, so it'll help increase organic matter. It's a pretty good crop. It's a cool season crop, needs to be seeded cool time of the year. Here's a warm season mix. I really like mixes like this one. Cowpea, soybean, pearl millet, sorghum Sudan, sunflower, buckwheat, safflower. Those are all warm season. We do throw some radish and turnip in there. And I tell people about the radish and turnip deal. If you're going to graze livestock, go with the turnips. If you don't have livestock, go with the radish. Radish will sequester more nitrogen than a turnip, and it has a deeper taproot. You'll break up compaction layers more. But that's a pretty basic warm season mix. You get a tremendous amount of production. You really have a lot of diversity in there. You'll really improve soil health quickly and build those soil aggregates that Dr. Nichols talked about. Buckwheat is one we like to put in our mixes because it does 2 things. One, it attracts a lot of pollinators. The second thing is it scavenges phosphorus, and it'll do a really good job of getting that phosphorus and making it available for your next crop. One thing you need to be aware of with buckwheat is it's very short season. So you don't want to put it in too early and then have it go to seed and be a problem in the next crop. But we use winter to our advantage. Showed you this one earlier. If I even have 40-day window where I'm not having something growing, I'm going to be putting a cover crop like this in. Because in 40 days, I can have significant growth on a cowpea, proso millet, buckwheat. You know, as long as it's a warm season time of the year, because they're all warm season crops. Here's one I seeded just last year following spring wheat harvest. This photo was taken on October 8th. We had froze at least 20 times before that photo was taken. Yet look at all the flowering species. We still have native pollinators working on there in October. You don't see that very often. When people say their soils are too cool, it's just because your soil health isn't there yet. You don't have the biology in the soil yet to warm it up. We can extend the growing season if we focus on healthy soils. By so doing, we can take advantage of just what was talked about so many times today, taking that sunlight, photosynthesis, and storing carbon in the soil. So here's one I hear really often. I get calls, oh, I've been doing this no-till and I got all this litter built up. This is actually a good friend of mine. He lives about 20 miles north of me. He says, Gabe, I'm having a problem with too much residue getting built up. And he had just been started in no-till about 5 years. Drove up there, we could see exactly what he had seeded the previous 5 years. Corn, sunflower, spring wheat, winter wheat, all high carbon crops. I said, Glenn, you don't have a residue problem, you got a carbon nitrogen ratio problem. You're seeding all species that are high in carbon, low in nitrogen, and your residue's not cycling through. Notice down there, like the wheat straw is 80-1, corn stover's about the same thing. He was seeding all these, and Dr. Nichols showed how we need to be down to that somewhere between 10 and 12-1. Carbon nitrogen ratio. I said, Glenn, this is an easy fix. All you got to do is go in there and seed a cover crop following your wheat harvest, which he did. This is peas and radish in there. And then the next year, he added peas to his crop rotation. Took care of his residue in 1 year. You got to think of carbon nitrogen ratios. So if you have too much residue being built up, the answer isn't to go and disc it all down. The answer is to diversify the rotation and naturally let nature cycle it through. Balance that carbon nitrogen ratio. Then when you do, you always add something like the tillage radish that's available here to store that nitrogen, and then it'll release it in the spring for the next year's crop. You take advantage of these things. There's a radish. Notice that tillage radish there is about 12 inches above the soil surface. Usually when you see that, if you dig down in the soil about 12 inches, you're going to find a compaction layer. Because what will happen, that radish will start growing down till it hits a compaction layer. Then it'll grow above ground until it gets enough energy, hopefully, to poke its way through. And that's what we're illustrating there. There was a compaction layer down in that soil about a foot down. That's usually what happens. Some of these radishes can get really large. Now, if you seed them in the spring, they're usually going to bolt and go to seed. So we recommend seeding them, late June into July on. And then you'll get these bigger tubers. That's a 16-inch tire there, and look at the size of that radish. That's my buddy David Brandt from Ohio. People who don't think this can work. David's been no-till since 1972, cover crop since 1978. He has no livestock. He grows corn, soybeans, and winter wheat. He's now at 225 bushel corn, 0 synthetic inputs of any kind. One of the most amazing things I've ever seen is 2 years ago I went out to David's in the fall. Out there in Ohio, everybody puts in drain tile, but not David. Tight yellow clay soils. I mean, it's just ugly soil. We went to an area, a field, where David was farming, and over there, they see which neighbor can almost touch the other one. They were farming about 3 inches apart. We took a step over in the neighbor's field, dug down, and it's just this tight yellow clay, just ugly stuff. Took a step over into David's field, 18 inches, the most beautiful black topsoil you've ever seen. It's absolutely amazing. He changed his soil completely. They're actually naming a soil after him now because they've never seen anything like that in Ohio. But that's a true story, and if you ever get a chance to go to David Brandt's, do it. We can change soil. We can build aggregates. Dr. Nichols showed that. So what do you want to do? Do you want to continue to write checks for all these inputs and do these things? Or do we want to build soil? David says he can grow big radishes, so I got to show my big turnip there. So, I question the rationale of some things. I've been on that farm since 1983. We lived there since 83 and bought it 91. This is my neighbor, and I know he's not here, so I can talk about him. That road there separates his place from mine. He grows only 2 crops, spring wheat and flax. That's all he's grown for the past 31 years. Every fall, he goes out there and tills this low spot. Every single fall. He hasn't missed a year yet. June 15th, 2009, they were forecasting a major rainfall event in Bismarck. Usually means about a 1/4 inch, but I took this photo. It started raining at 6:30 in the evening. By 12 midnight, we had 13.2 inches. That's the actual photo. There's his field 3 weeks later, okay? My fields sit lower than his, but there's a road between. Jay Fear, our district conservationist, came out the morning after that rain. We had another 4 tenths during the night. And he took that photo of my field. Notice the slope there? I lost a little bit of residue, but after 13.6 inches of rain, I didn't think that was too bad. Dr. Nichols talked about it. If you have the pore spaces, you can infiltrate that rain. Now, did I infiltrate all 13.6 inches? No. We lost some over the top. But we infiltrated quite a bit of it. Jay took this photo. That's a spadeful of our soil after 13.6 inches of rain. Notice those pore spaces? Now, I started out, I wish I had a photo of what the soil was like in 91 when I bought the place, but there was no aggregation. You know, it was pretty well destroyed. But you can build that soil structure if you focus on soil life. There's what we can do now. I mentioned we used to be able to infiltrate a 1/2 inch. The last test NRCS did on my place, we can infiltrate over 8 inches an hour now. I've never seen it rain 8 inches in an hour. It's not how much moisture you get, it's how much can you store, infiltrate into the soil, store in that soil profile, and then move throughout it when needed. 2 weeks ago, I was in southeastern Missouri speaking, and it just absolutely blew my mind. They get 53 inches of rainfall on the year on average, and they're putting another 50 inches on irrigated in order to produce 200 bushel corn. I'll show you coming up what I can produce, and then we'll talk about it. The 5th thing is what else happened in a native prairie ecosystem. It was animal impact. I own this Prairie Farmer paper back from 1871. I bought it because I just liked that photo. Because how are our prairie soils formed? Large herds of grazing animals moving across them, being chased by the predators. And then we had the local animals like the rabbits and grasshoppers, which were a major numbered herbivore on the Great Plains. But it was this ecosystem of a lot of livestock integration. Where are the animals today? They've been removed. Now, I want to tell you right up front, I've got 400 acres of cropland that we can't graze livestock on. It's surrounded by housing developments, and I just didn't want to take the chance of getting a phone call that the cattle are drinking out of the neighbor's swimming pool, so I just don't bother doing it. We're still doing cover crops every year on those 400 acres, but my soil health just won't quite get to the level of where we're able to integrate livestock. In 2007, I was speaking up in Brandon, Manitoba, and after I was done speaking, I had this guy up in my face saying, "You got to see what I'm doing up here," and it was Neil Dennis, and Neil Dennis is known as the mob grazer who puts 1 million pounds of a live weight, animal weight per acre on and moves them 5-6 times a day. We thought we were doing high stock density on our place when we were grazing 100, 150,000, but I drove up to Neil's that spring to see what he was doing. And what impressed me the most is how he was building soil because of that animal impact. And he was advancing his soil health further. When on the way home I thought about it, and I really came to the conclusion that was a missing link in my cropland. You know, I was grazing these cover crops, but I was only doing it in the fall and winter. I needed to integrate livestock more onto the cropland. That's a picture of our operation today, and the reason I show this, the light blue is cropland areas, the light green is tame grass pastures, and then the yellow outlined areas is perennial native pastures, and we're trying to integrate everything, rotate all the livestock through there. I mentioned how we could, when we bought that place, it could run 65 cow-calf pairs and about 35 yearlings. Today we're running 350 cow-calf pairs, between 400 and 800 yearlings and grass-finished animals, plus we have some other species which I'll talk about. Now, another way to get these cover crops into your rotation is by using fall-seeded biennials, and that's a really easy way to get cover crops into most operations. I showed you before I started out with triticale vetch. This is a photo just taken this fall. Triticale vetch just poking up. And I actually didn't seed this till October 8th this year. Now we had already froze. I know our first frost this year was on September 10th, so we had froze many times. But there's still a window of time. The soil's warm enough, we can get these going. So don't pass up any window of time. Now, I talked to you earlier about what's your resource concern. Well, on this particular field here, these photos are a few years old, but our resource concern was we didn't have enough armor on the soil surface. So we purposely let these fall-seeded biennials get to a higher carbon state, in other words, more mature. If we were going for maximum gain on the livestock, I'd never recommend you wait that long to graze because the nutrient quality drops precipitously once it starts to head out. But what we'll do is we'll go in there and we'll set up really small paddocks. This isn't on the triticale vetch. It's just a good photo of showing how small an area we'll set up. And then we'll use these bat latches. They're little solar-powered gate openers. So we just string the wire, and that's a bungee cord attached to it, and you just punch the time in. You want that little dial to turn. Then that dial will turn, that bungee cord will fly open, and the cattle will move themselves. So it usually only takes us about an hour, hour and a half in the morning to roll up the previous day's 5 or 6 fences, set up the new ones, we set the timers, and then we're good for a day. So it's really not that much work, and it actually is pretty enjoyable. There are the livestock out grazing in there. We put about 675,000 pounds of live weight per acre on there. We were moving them 5 to 6 times a day. There the bat latch just opened up, and the livestock are moving on to the next piece. But here's what I really want to show you. That's what it looks like after the animals graze there. Our resource concern was armor on the soil, carbon on the soil surface. So that's what we're using the livestock for. Livestock in our operation are simply a tool. They're a tool to be used to improve the health of the resource. You know, we don't provide our livestock with bed and breakfast. They got to earn their keep. Then, from this photo until that one was just a couple of days. Because we let that cover crop, that winter triticale, get to anthesis, that animal impact will kill it, and I don't have to use a herbicide. Then I get that kind of armor on there. That's going to, uh-oh. Hit the wrong button, evidently. I'll get there in a second. So if we go on there, we don't have to spray a herbicide then, and we can go in and seed directly into that field. And more photos than I thought in there. Okay. Okay. There we are seeding. That's what the seed mixes will look like. You know, it's a very diverse mix that we're going to put in there. Predominantly warm season. Now, I always get asked, how do you get that to flow through the drill? Just set it up so the largest seed can flow through. And then I seed most of these mixes at 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch deep, and it works real well. Now, if you run into really dry conditions, I'd maybe separate the tiny legumes out, put them through a legume box, or drop them on the soil surface and go a little deeper with the larger seed. There's the diverse mix we're seeding in this particular field. But it depends what the resource concern was. The resource concern on this field, because it was some newly rented land, I wanted to get on there armor on the surface, and then I wanted to get maximum species in there to feed soil life and build organic matter. So think of it this way. I don't know how many species are here. I didn't count them up. Something like 18 or 20. If I would seed monocultures, That biology in that field, it would only get one diet, whatever species I seeded. By seeding this many, I'm feeding that biology a very diverse diet. Then I'm doing it all in 1 year. If I'd seed a monoculture, it'd take me 20 years. I'm more or less advancing or accelerating biological time because I'm feeding that soil biology a very diverse diet in 1 year as opposed to 20 years of monocultures. There's what it looks like coming up. And I like this photo. I'm a little embarrassed. There's some bare ground there. But you see how those larger seeds just break away for the smaller seed? That's how it works. And we've all seen that when we seed a field, you know, you'll get that seed row just opening up. I am pretty proud of the soil aggregation there of that soil. We're optimizing solar energy collection. Think of it, if I just seed a monoculture, I only have one leaf size or shape out there. With these diverse mixes, no matter what angle that sunlight is, I'm going to be collecting maximum amount of solar energy and converting that into carbon. And as Dr. Nichols talked about, that's what we're all doing. We're trying to build carbon. With any rain at all, that's what it looks like in September. So you got this very diverse polyculture out there. And then we have a lot of options with that. You know, we're in the grass finishing business, so one of our options is to grass finish some cattle on there if we want. If we don't want to do that, we can let it go and let it continue to collect sunlight and build biomass. This photo was taken right before a frost. That one was taken right after a frost. There's kale and hairy vetch and species like that thrive when it's cool. You know, like you take like kale and hairy vetch, it's got to get down to about 15 degrees 3 nights in a row to kill it. So you can extend your growing season. When I talk about a living root in the ground as long as possible, this is one way to do it. This is how we convert most of our cover crops to dollars, though, as we graze cow-calf pairs on it. I told you how I used to calve in March. Now we don't start calving until mid-May. We calve from mid-May through June. We leave the calves on the cows all winter and just let them out and graze. And their nutritional needs are met. Hairy vetch, it'll be from 20 to 30% crude protein while it's growing, but even here in December, North Dakota State did some research, that's still 18% crude protein in December. So we're balancing the energy needs and the protein needs of those cattle with these cover crops. And they can graze through a lot of snow, you know. Now, because of how our place sits and we're in city jurisdiction, I'm not able to make it all winter without feeding hay. We usually got to go 70 to 90 days where we'll put them on bale grazing. But we're going to graze as long as possible. And they're a tool. That's not a herd of muskox. That's 40 degrees below zero. That's our cattle out there, cow-calf pairs grazing cover crops. I actually felt a little sorry for my son as I sat in the pickup and he walked out and took that photo. But, you know, he's young. He'll get over it. Yeah. But a lot of people, you know, we've spoiled livestock nowadays. We don't have, most of the livestock out there, and I'm talking beef cattle especially, they're not bred anymore to survive under these conditions, you know. It's taken us a number of years and we're not there yet, but we're working on it. And they do just fine. And they're able to be used as a tool by us. And with that tool, we're building soils, is what we're doing. We're collecting sunlight, putting it in the soil as carbon. That photo there, if you can see the blue lines there, that's where we laid down the biomass from a cover crop 3 years earlier. Look at the amount of topsoil we've built on top of that now. We can build soils much faster than we used to think we could. But it's just a matter of getting back to the principles of nature and using them. I like to tell people we like to only have the livestock eat a third of the above ground biomass. Leave 2/3. Because we want that armor on the surface to feed those critters below ground, the macro and microbiology. So when we're grazing these covers during the winter, we don't graze at all. You know, we're only taking a third and we're moving them. Now, we're not moving them every day during the winter. We're moving them once every 10 days to 2 weeks with a hot wire. But then this is what it looks like in the spring. Now, this field here is where we took this soil test. And this is your conventional standard soil test. And I know you can't read that, but in the upper left it shows how many units of nitrogen, top 2 feet. It shows 10 units. So the question before, back here, about using all the nitrogen. How much corn can I grow on 10 units of N? Somebody answer. 10 bushels was the answer. Okay, I'm going to show you the fallacy of this type of soil test. Now, if I'd go to an agronomist, they'd recommend, county average, Burley County, North Dakota is just under 100 bushels an acre in our environment. So they'd recommend I should probably put on what? At least 100 units in, right? Here we are planting into that residue. When I say I'm a no-tiller, I'm a no-tiller. On the left is planted, on the right is not. I want least amount of disturbance possible. Notice we don't even put row markers down. That's too much disturbance for me. Okay, so I'm serious. We start with this much residue. Now I'm planting corn a little later. I plant corn a little later. I tell people I plant later simply because corn's a warm season crop. It's not meant to be planted when there's snow on the ground, Also, I'll be honest, I'm just kind of slow getting my work done, so that's part of the other reason. I'm using only 78-day hybrids usually. Most of the guys in the area are planting a bit earlier. They're going in last week in April, first week in May, with 80 to 82-day varieties. I up the population. Most guys are planting about 22,000. I'll plant 27 or 28 and go with the 78-day variety for a few reasons. Number one is I'm using organic seed, and I don't want that GMO cross-contamination, so I want to plant a little later. The other thing is, sign the back of the check, not the front. I'm not going to pay for drying corn down, so I want a shorter day variety that I'm sure will be mature and dry. The other thing is I want a little shorter day variety so my vetch I have growing in the corn crop can capture more sunlight and put on more growth in the fall. So those are the reasons I go with shorter days. So we go from this much residue, that's May 15th. Now on the left is June 16th. On the right is July 1st. Where's all my residue going? Question back here.
Previous slide, you just mentioned you planted corn with cover crop, correct?
On this photo, excuse me.
That's when you mentioned it. You're planting corn and vetch with cover crop. How are you applying the vetch?
Yep. Now, this series of photos I'm showing you, there's no cover crop in because I want to show the disappearance. The question was, how do I seed my vetch? Now, I used to, back in the old days, I used to seed winter triticale and hairy vetch together. Then I went in there with a herbicide, killed off the winter triticale. It'd just kind of make the vetch sick, and then I'd plant the corn directly in that. I no longer do that because I'm trying to eliminate all herbicide use. What I do now is I go in the spring. The day before I plant my corn, I'm actually going in there and seeding my covers. And I don't just seed hairy vetch alone, I seed several types of clovers with it. Then the next day I plant the corn. Now I found an old white planter on 15-inch rows, and that's this winter's project. If I ever make it home, I'm gonna start tearing into that, and so I can do it all in one pass, because I don't want to do 2 passes.
How do you plan on doing it in one pass?
We'll have, it's 15-inch rows, so the corn will be on 30, and then the cover crop will be on 15-inch spaces in between. That's how I plant that. So we go from May 15th. Look at the residue disappearing in that photo. Now, I get a lot of scientists out to my place. Some of them, like Dr. Nichols, I just love it when she comes and visits. Most of them come to disprove or try and disprove what I'm doing. Most of them look at the madness and say there's no way we can do a scientific test here. There's too many variables, and they leave, which is probably a good thing. Others, like Dr. Ray Ward, if you know Dr. Ray Ward, he owns Ward Labs at Kearney, Nebraska. He said, Gabe, I understand what you're trying to do, but you're going to deplete your soils. So he came up himself, and he actually, on this field, he took tissue analysis. So this is the same field where we did the standard soil test. There's his leaf tissue analysis, and I know you can't read that, but every single nutrient he tested for was sufficient or above. Now, I never added anything. We don't use anything at all. I mean, we don't use any foliars, nothing down the tube, nothing between the rows. So how could I go from that 10 units of N to a soil test with that corn there that looks pretty dark green and healthy and showing I'm actually nudging into the high category for nitrogen on a leaf tissue analysis? How's that happen? There's that field by fall. And I'm embarrassed of this photo, and that's why I plant the vetches and clovers in there now, because we got nothing but bare soil. It's the soil life. It's the biology. That's the problem with your standard soil tests today. They don't take into account soil biology. If you have a healthy, functioning soil, that biology is going to cycle that residue through and feed that soil. That's 142 bushel corn. Cost me $1.44 a bushel. That's every cost, including trucking, storage, everything. Corn this fall at home was $1.73. I can still make a few pennies, not much. But I tell you what, I'm going to be making money when other people can't. You know, I was in Illinois here last spring, and a banker came up to me afterwards and he said, "Gabe, do you know if corn drops below $5, half of my borrowers will not make their payment?" And I said, "My goodness, that's going to happen." He said, "I know, that's why I'm not sleeping anymore." You know, but that's what we've come to. We've driven up costs so high, and we've bought into this where we have to keep using inputs. You can do it without it. And I don't care whether you're conventional or organic. If we focus on the soil and feeding the soil, we can get there. The soil can be alive. Our management just has to allow it to be. And that's the whole motto. We need to start focusing on feeding the soil. Soil without biology is just geology. And that's the problem with the standard soil test. It's just looking at the chemical and physical properties. It's not looking at the biological component in the soil. Dr. Rick Haney, who is an ARS researcher at Temple, Texas, developed a new soil test about 5 years ago that can actually take into account soil biology. And he can fairly accurately predict how much of those nutrients, N, P, and K, you're going to get cycled through because of biology. I strongly recommend you try this soil test. Ward Labs at Kearney, Wood Labs, there's several labs around the country that are doing this commercially now. And you'll get back, like Dr. Nichols talked about, they were only taking into account the inorganic fraction. They weren't taking into account the organic fraction in the soil. So use this test about 2 weeks before you seed, and you can adjust inputs accordingly. Now, I don't care whether you're conventional or organic, because a lot of organic producers are using organic fertilizers. It'll help there too. And what he's doing is he's measuring the water extractable organic carbon, which is the food that the biology eats. And that's something that hadn't been done before. This shows you the importance of animal integration, and I think. Dr. Haney did these tests himself on my soils, and the different colored bars there, the red bar is actually a field that's been 30 years no-till, because it was in alfalfa when I bought that place. The lime green bars are 20 years no-till. These fields are side by side, same soil type. They've had the same diverse cash rotation over the last 20 years, same cover crops. The only difference is the lime barred field has been grazed high stock density with livestock twice in the previous 6 years. Over on the left, that's nitrogen. There's really no difference, 86 to 90 pounds. But the second bar from the left is inorganic phosphorus. We jumped from 65 pounds to 239. So what this shows, what it proved to Dr. Haney and a lot of other scientists, was those people who thought that I was going to deplete all the nutrients out of my soil, no, we're building it, and we're actually taking phosphorus and potassium that was unavailable and making it more available. That's how come I can produce these yields without having to add the inputs. You know, soils will build themselves. Look at native prairie ecosystems. So that proved a lot to me. My son took this photo a number of years ago, and I just love it, so I put it in all my presentations. That's our cattle in the foreground. That's the neighbor in the background. Which one's costing more money? Which one's going to make you more money? I work with a lot of producers all over North America. Here's a young guy, Michael Thompson from Kansas. He first came and heard Ray Archuleta and myself speak 4 years ago. And he went to his dad and said, "Dad, I really want to try this." And his dad says, "Well, here's what we'll do. We're going to take an 80-acre field. We're going to split it in half. I'm going to farm half. You're going to farm half." That's after 4 years. Look at that difference. If that doesn't prove to you what no-till and diversity can do, in 4 years is all. And now his dad's converting to no-till and diversity. It's absolutely amazing how fast we can change things if we put our minds to it. I mentioned that our soils were 1.7 to 1.9% organic matter when we started. Our cropland fields are now 5.3 to 6.1, and we actually have one field that's 11.1%. We've been able, it's just a small plot area that we've been working on a little harder than the others, but we can advance these rapidly. And the reason I think we can do it a lot faster than this, you know, I had to learn this over the past 20 years, but now, thanks to a lot of individuals working on it, we can accelerate soil health a lot faster than we thought. So what's it worth? So my 1% organic matter soils, if you have a 1% organic matter, is going to be worth about $750 worth of NPK, sulfur, and carbon. So if we build that up, get near 5-6%. A number of years ago, when I was still borrowing a little money from the banker, I went to him and I said, "I want to put that on my balance sheet as prepaid fertilizer." And he laughed at me, and I said, "Hey, I'm not kidding. You let everybody else do it. Why not me?" You know? Well, he wasn't so sure, so I quit using the banker. Yep. My lines are off here, but I want to show you water holding capacity on soils. Okay, we have silt loam soils, so that middle column that's off there. When I started, I was less than 2% organic matter, which meant in the top 4 feet of the soil profile, I could only hold a little under 8 inches of water. Well, now I'm well over 5% organic matter soils. I can hold over 20 inches of water in my soil in the top 4 feet. We only get about 15 inches a year, you know? It's not how much rainfall you get, it's how much can you infiltrate, store in that soil profile to be used by the plants. 1% organic matter, top 6 inches of soil can hold about 27,000 gallons of water. So in other words, in 1993, my soils could only hold 256 million gallons of water. Today, I can hold over 810,000 gallons of water. That's key, because the more moisture we have available, the more biomass we're going to produce, the more carbon we're going to sequester, the more nutrients we're going to cycle through. It's just a win-win-win situation. It blows my mind how many people today they're so worried about getting rid of the water. If I was them, I'd be using the water to build the soil. Why do we want to pump it down and get it down into the Gulf of Mexico? Let's use it to produce biomass, produce nutrients, increase our soil health. Soil carbon is the key driver for the nutritional status of plants and therefore the mineral density in animals and people. Soil carbon is the key driver for farm profit. There's no doubt about it. I was really pleased Dr. Nichols said that. Everybody that's involved in land regeneration will tell you that. We got to start talking in terms of carbon. And that's what it's about, because carbon is directly related to farm profit. All living things are based on carbon, and she said this. This is a really good quote I like. In nature's economy, the currency is not money, it is life. And that's what it's about. We have to have a living, healthy ecosystem in order for the soil to function. So on our operation, we focus on feeding the whole, feeding everything. Not just the above ground biology, but the below ground. Not just the plants, but all the microorganisms, including all the insects. There's a picture of a pollinator on a sunflower plant. There's lady beetles. We're trying to attract all these predator insects. We want cover crops dispersed throughout our operation, and we prefer to have them growing along with the cash crop so we can harbor all these predator insects. Good friend of mine, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who is an entomologist with ARS in Brookings, South Dakota, told me this. For every one species that's a pest, there's 1,700 that are beneficial or indifferent. So in other words, when we, conventional producers put that insecticide on that seed, what are you targeting? You're going to kill them all. We have to get away from that. That's just not healthy. It's not healthy for the ecosystem. And then we wonder why we got to keep spraying pests. Neighbor right next to me farms 40,000 cropland acres. Okay? It's a big operator. Those planes are going constant, spraying everything. And I just cringe every time. He's got pests all the time. I haven't had to use a pesticide since before the turn of the century. We just don't have a problem because we've got the home for all the predator insects to take care of them. And then it's all the macro and microbiology also. So besides that, then you got the living animals. You know, I'll never forget, I was on that farm 3 years before we saw a single deer on that farm. Back here 4 winters ago, we had 120 plus inches of snow. North Dakota Game and Fish Department flew over in their plane, counted 876 deer on 1/4 of my land. That's what cover crops will do. So if you don't like deer, don't plant cover crops. You know? Now I mentioned we run 350 cow-calf pairs, calve in May and June, leave the calves on the cows all summer. Then we run those, we fence line wean them and run the stocker cattle or grass cattle. We also buy a couple of groups of organic cattle and bring them on. And then we grass finish. We're grass finishing a number of livestock now. And we run grass finished lambs. Back when my son was in college, all of a sudden I get a phone call one day and he says, Dad, you know, you've been preaching for years about diversity. You want all these cash cover crops. We don't have enough diversity of livestock. Well, here was his answer. What could I say to him, you know? We have over 100 permanent pastures on our operation, infinite number of smaller pastures, and I tell people, these sheep are on a planned grazing system. Wherever they plan on going, that's where they are. We also run broilers, and I laugh because in the cattle business, we're all excited about $3 calves. We sell $5 a pound broilers right now. You know, that is the most profitable enterprise on our operation right there, hands down. He's only limited by the number his mom and dad will help him butcher. That's all he's limited. He also runs laying hens, and it's absolutely amazing. I found interesting the speaker right before lunch talking about the price of eggs. Paul runs 500 to 600 laying hens. Those are his portable egg mobiles, he calls them. He takes those old stock trailers and he guts them out, puts a nest box in their water. We pull them around with the grass-finished cattle. They harvest all the fly larvae in that. We're just feeding them a few screenings. People stand in line at farmer's market an hour before we open to pay $4 a dozen. And he can't produce enough. It's absolutely unbelievable what people pay for this stuff. And the marketing opportunities are unreal for any young people wanting to get involved in ag. We also run pastured pork. We farrow and raise them ourselves. We don't have, obviously in North Dakota, there's not many wooded areas, so these are around all the shelter belts, etc. But Paul called me here. I haven't been home for a little while, but he called. Wednesday is one day he takes his and sells direct in town. And in 2 hours, Wednesday evening, he sold 3 hogs and 1 beef, 1 package at a time in 2 hours. That's the demand. So what we're trying to do with all these species is we're trying to harvest different energy levels. You know, the beef cattle are there, and then we'll follow, or else in with them are the ewes and lambs, and then following them will be the hogs, and then all the laying hens will be after that. The broilers, we don't get the broilers out in the big pastures, they're closer to home, but we're trying to add all these different enterprises per acre. So we're stacking all these enterprises. You know, I tell people when I'm talking to the corn and bean guys, you're going to follow that price of corn and beans pretty close, and your whole income hinges on it. I could care less what corn or beans brings because we have so many different operations. If one's up, the other one's down, vice versa, just doesn't matter. But you look at one of the most popular thoughts today, whereas how are you going to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050? If we change to a production model where we stack more enterprises per acre, I can outproduce nutrient-dense foods per acre over any monoculture out there. Feeding 10 billion people is absolutely no problem if we change away from this current production model. We got to stack enterprises. And then we wonder why our small towns dry up. how many young people would be dying to get an enterprise in agriculture? You know, there's no end to it. We adults need to help them get started. And we can add a lot more enterprises per acre than we think. So this is the income streams we have on our operation today. And we should have a lot more. I mean, there's a lot more things we could be doing on our operation, but a little short of manpower right now. We as producers must remember that we are in the business of producing human nutrition. So often we think we're producing commodities, we're not. The decisions we make directly affect human health. The United States spends more on health care than any other country in the world, yet we're the 42nd healthiest country in the world. Are farmers to blame for all that? Of course not. But we have to take part of the blame because we're not focused on producing truly nutrient-dense foods. This is our new slaughter facility. A group of us got together. We were limited as our options on where we can get animals slaughtered and state inspected. So a bunch of us built this facility so we can direct market. So now we're trying to direct market everything we produce on our operation. You know, and you don't think there isn't a market for organic or, I am not certified organic. I refuse to, it's my philosophy, I just don't want to have to pay somebody to prove what I already know. So we're not certified organic, but we're selling our products as all natural, and it's amazing the premium, you know. This is our label. We have our own trademark label, Nourished by Nature, and then we're selling it just at farmers markets, direct market. I can't tell you the amount of satisfaction of me charging somebody $20 a pound for a tenderloin, and they hand me the money and thank me for selling it to them. That's a good feeling, you know, really good feeling. It is, and it's out there, you know. I laugh at people who say, well, organic, you have to charge more money. I can produce these things at a lower cost than any conventional producer can. You know, we can do it because we're relying on nature and taking advantage of the things. You know, our broilers and layers are simply being fed screenings. You know, that's a waste product that wouldn't otherwise get used. Yeah, we're converting it to $4 a dozen eggs, $5 a pound protein. Our beef animals, last year on our analysis, it cost us $1,022 to deliver a finished 1,200-pound animal to the slaughter facility. I don't know of any feedlot that can do it. That includes the cost of carrying that cow a year, too. So we can do this at a much lower cost. But let me tell you, I'm a capitalist. If somebody's going to pay me 20 bucks a pound, I'm going to take it, you know, plain and simple. So here's what we've done on our operation, and I know it's a little hard to see, but when we started out in 1993, organic matter levels were less than 2%. Then we started to diversify the cash crop rotation, and we noticed it in shut. Then in 1997, we started to really integrate cover crops, another jump in organic matter. Then we started to really integrate the multi-species cover crops. That's when we noticed a really large advancement in soil health. And they can help you with this here at Elberle Seeds. You know, get these cover crop mixes, get them into your operation. Then in 2010, and we really started to integrate the multi-species grazing onto the cropland, another jump in soil health. And now this past year, as I mentioned, we've got one field that tests 11.1% organic matter. My son said he has a goal. In his lifetime, he wants to see all of our land over 12% organic matter. And he's going to get there much faster. It isn't going to take that long, and he'll be there. But we can do that. We can build soil health if we focus on it. So here's what it's about to us in our operation. If we have healthy soil, we're going to have clean air, clean water, healthy plants, healthy animals, and healthy people. And that's what we're focused on. There's my contact information. You can feel free to call me at any time, and I'll be happy to visit with you.